That was funnier than I thought it was. I was just being honest.
Yeah. Why in the world do the people who have these experiences have the proclivity to attribute them to supernatural sources, like to a divine source? Consciousness isn't just mysterious. It's like really mysterious. It's the most mysterious thing.
Okay. There's any number of explanations I've heard for the origins of religion, and I find almost all of them plausible in different forms, except for the one that asserts that they come directly from a supernatural being.
Well, okay, so that's the one we're gonna
Sure.
we're gonna pursue though, because
That was funnier than I thought it was. I was just being honest.
yeah, well, honesty is often funnier than people think it is.
Boy, don't I know.
So people can have these experiences, and they can be evoked in a variety of ways, and people often find them very valuable, at least in terms of their subjective report.
I agree.
And the psilocybin experiments, and also the large-scale analysis of psychedelic drug users, by the way, also indicate that the use of such substances is generally associated with an increment in health rather than a decrement, which is quite interesting, right? It's not something you'd necessarily expect. So here's a question. Why in the world do the people who have these experiences have the proclivity to attribute them to supernatural sources, like to a divine source? Like, what's going on there? Why is that the case?
So best guess, and this is contrary, so the skepticism isn't about, hey, let's debunk this and come up with, but if we were going to go through potential plausible explanations, to me this is very similar to in the 40s and 50s when people were supposedly abducted by aliens or ran into aliens. They had descriptions of aliens that pretty much were varied and often matched the various monsters that you saw in the movies then. After 2001, or after Close Encounters of the Third Kind, almost all descriptions of aliens became the almond-headed, this. Mm-hmm. The narrative in the culture about what an alien was
converged.
Yeah. And people were, this is what I experienced. In the same way that people will sometimes cameras will catch orbs, or a particular lighting effect in a house that is supposedly haunted will be perceived as a ghost, as a spiritual, humanoid form. When we, in some cases, can show that that's actually not the case. In other cases, we have no idea what they necessarily saw. But because what people understand about spirits and souls and ghosts is in the zeitgeist of how we think, it enters the consciousness as a plausible explanation, even if ultimately there's no such thing as ghosts.
But that explains why they converge, but it doesn't explain why the initial impetus is the attribution of the experiences to something supernatural, like to something. Oh. See, fair enough.
I'm sure that I'm not convinced that necessarily the natural instinct is to apply it to something supernatural. I think it may be more the case that not only are we pattern recognition machines, but we're the descendants of people who, how you see faces and everything.
Yeah, that's a good hypothesis. That's
so you see faces, or you anticipate that there's something in the bush out to get you, and when you go and actually investigate and you find there's nothing in the bush out to get you, rather than assuming that you might have been mistaken, maybe it's a spirit.
Yeah, the social psychologists call that the hyperactive agency detector.
And the fact that we can be, before we had a good understanding, we still don't have a good understanding of death and the mind and stuff. But if I'm standing here talking to you and I drop over dead, there's a clear, undeniable difference in me sitting here as an animated being and me laying there as no longer there. And so it seems a natural inference that something that about me has left. That doesn't mean that there's actually something about me, like a soul or whatever, that's left. We don't tend to think the same thing when the radio stops working or the television stops working. It's not like the man in the TV has left. It's just off. But it seems that those sorts of natural...
I don't know if you want to use that analogy, because it suggests that whatever's in the TV is coming from an external source. And you're definitely not making that argument with regards to the soul.
Well, the TV station isn't in my living room, so there's at least some external source sending it to there.
Right, but that's exactly my point.
Yeah, that's all I was going for.
You can make a case that consciousness isn't exactly in your head either, even though it's localized there.
So why would I think consciousness is anywhere other than my head?
Well, how do you account for consciousness?
Well, I'm not sure that we can account for consciousness.
This is definitely true.
But
yes. See, and that's
I have
another
no reason to think
well,
that it's beyond, what the brain produces. The fact that something's mysterious doesn't mean that, well, if something's mysterious...
Consciousness isn't just mysterious. It's like really mysterious. It's the most mysterious thing.
Okay, well,
right? It's not like ordinary mysterious.
The fact that something is really mysterious to the point where I think you and I would agree that we don't have an explanation for it. Okay, if there was something like that, we'll say that it's maybe consciousness. We agree we don't have an explanation, or at least a complete one for consciousness?
Or even a partial one.
Okay, sure.
Say. It seems vaguely associated
consciousness
with the brain.
is really mysterious, and you and I have no explanation for it. As human beings, we're uncomfortable with saying, I don't know. This is something I'm trying to teach people to become more comfortable with, is to say, I don't know. And so when you ask me about consciousness, my answer is, I don't know. But for other people, they're so uncomfortable with I don't know that they posit an explanation that they cannot justify. Something is untestable and unfalsifiable, and that is that there's a ghost in the machine. I can't make that leap because it is entirely speculation without support. It seems intuitively right because of how we view the world. And yet, I would rather say, I don't know, and then continue to explore it, because I worry that by asserting what the explanation is, you stop looking for the actual explanation.